Behold, my glorious supporter DerpyTW has requested some discussion about personality tests. This is that early 2000s meme. Ooh, delicious. DerpyTW asks, and I will read you their question, what is your opinion on personality tests, whether that be the big five personality tests or something else? For those unaware, pretty much from the questions we asked, you are a person who is XYZ type of person or person. I saw someone, Derpy says, say that they found a better understanding of themselves from the answers. It might just be your own self-reflections, but you feel like you almost know the results before you take the test. What do I think? Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with you. I think I never find them surprising. I often find them reductive or kind of frustrating. I think a good place to start is one that's like obviously bad, but we can talk about why, which is the alignment chart for D&D. Or maybe it's not originally from D&D, but lawful, chaotic, good, evil. Just as a quick framing thing, if you're not familiar with this, evil here means selfish, not like, I don't know, but it just means self-serving. You can play a chaotic evil character and be perfectly sane and totally recognizable and not a sociopath as a normal person in society. That it sounds dramatic. People dramatize it. But chaotic evil can be perfectly sane and reasonable. There are people I assure you, that act chaotic evil a lot of the time. Now, of course, the problem with this alignment chart, is that this is not how humans work. You might have someone who like tends to act lawful good, maybe somebody with a very strong upbringing revolving around always doing right by others, and they're really routine focused or something. They would do a lot of things that are lawful good, but they are not lawful good. When I run D&D, they ask you to kind of pick an alignment, or races have kind of an innate alignment, but you still sort of pick. And my verbiage about it is, your race has an innate alignment. And how that works is, you're biologically predisposed to it. Humans, I would argue, for example, are probably like neutral evil. We are inherently selfish. When we do selfless things, I would argue it's from the frame of reference of being selfish. And there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. That's just how humans work. That is how our brains function. As far as I am aware, I have never met anyone who isn't this way. And the people who appeared to be, I, looked carefully and realized that it seems like they're just doing these altruistic things, but it is for them in some way. Or it could even be that you do something purely altruistic, but you do it as a sort of paying it forward. I think that making the world a better place will make the world a better place for me, eventually. So I would argue that there's three alignment things here. You are innately whatever, like racial alignment. You just are that way. Tritons are lawful good. They're guardians of the sea. They must innately have an instinct to guard and safeguard wildlife in the ocean. That's how I would rule that. You are lawful good in that sense. You can't like not be unless you weirdly don't have that instinct. You would be, from the perspective of your society, a bit of a sociopath. This could be fine, but that's what it would represent, I would argue. Then you, from time to time, probably almost certainly do things that are every alignment. You haven't done something chaotic before? What, do you live under a rock? Like, oh, sure you have, right? And if you think you haven't, really think about it. You definitely have. So in that sense, if you were to do a personality test and have your alignment evaluated, there is simultaneously no point in evaluating it, because everybody has the same one. You already know what it is based on what type of living creature you are. And there is also simultaneously no answer, because you're all of them. So I kind of feel like that's the same thing with personality tests. I feel like, the best ones show you how close you are to other, types. And then they give you a single final one because that's how they get retweeted or Facebooked or whatever. Sure, I get why they give you one answer, even though they probably know that's not meaningful. But I still think they're very focused on, you do this, or how often do you do this? And the thing about that is that, I'm thinking of, there are some that will say, you're more of a perceiver or judger or whatever. They have these spectrums. I forget exactly. It doesn't really matter. And the thing about that is that I might be more of one than the other, but that doesn't represent really the most important thing, which is when am I which one, And I don't really feel like any personality tests I've seen, even comes close to representing that, because it's not really possible. People have kind of infinite variation, and I think that's what makes people meaningfully different, is kind of when are they these ways that everybody is from time to time, but when are they that? How much and when? You know, you might say, well, I'm very judgmental when it doesn't matter. You know, I'm much more judgmental. But if you only knew me, you know, as an acquaintance, you would perceive me as being much less judgmental, because when it is something important, I'm not very judgmental. When it's something trivial, I do not shy away from having an opinion. I think that for me, because I'm open-minded and I frequently throw out and change my opinions, and I love other people's opinions, that it's fun. It engages with the thing. It just means I'm thinking more about the things that happen to me. I don't over scrutinize or criticize things when they matter, because that is not fair. So I don't do it. This means that it is very, very unhelpful to evaluate me as being judgmental, because not much of the time, but simultaneously a majority of the times it matters, I'm not, you know. So I don't know. I think that's like one of the big flaws with personality tests, is that people, it's more like what are the patterns of where people move on the alignment chart, not which one are they, because they aren't, or they automatically are one, and also not like how often do they do each one, because that also might matter surprisingly little. They might only do one kind of thing a lot when they're alone, or generally. They might be very emotionally vulnerable, but only when they're mostly alone. So are they emotionally vulnerable or not? You know, if a tree falls in the forest and you're emotionally vulnerable, do you open up to them? I don't know. Like it doesn't, that's not helpful. You know, no way of evaluating that tells you some single line truth about a person. I think I'm going to click on Derpy's spoiler. Sometimes people like spoiler out and, you know, you click it and then it's revealed. I'm going to click on what Derpy wrote for that, and we'll continue the discussion from there. Derpy says, personally, I find that personality tests are just a bit of a low-hanging fruit to make people feel good about themselves for some reason. Not saying to put yourself down, but it feels like a form of complacency can be made. Sort of like astrology. I'm a Taurus. That's just how we are. Strive to be better. I completely agree. I think I was about to launch into, I think the popularity of personality tests is a little bit more sinister than the personality tests themselves. It's people kind of trying to cheat and get given a personality rather than actually being a person. You are not a Taurus. There is no Taurus, you know. You're your own person, and if you act exactly like this thing, that happened because you read it and copied it subconsciously but deliberately in some way, because it makes you less vulnerable. It's a defense. You're safer, or you think you are, not in the long run, by having this kind of thing that explains yourself for you. You don't have to have this vulnerable self-discovery. You don't have to, you know, explain yourself that much. You could just kind of blame it on this thing. A lot of people don't do that, but still do this thing I'm talking about. Many people, you know, I think this is a controversial topic, but something I've thought about for a long time in my life is whether sexualities are this way. I'm not sure it's very meaningful to call yourself, for example, like asexual versus sexual. If you do, and it helps you, let me be crystal clear. You are getting no judgment whatsoever from me. You identify however you want. Intellectually, I would like to explore whether it is actually helpful in as much as people use it, because it kind of clouds for a lot of people. I know a lot of people that say they're asexual are well aware of this, by the way, but a lot of people aren't, and a lot of very sexual people, or who think of themselves as very sexual, because people use this like bucket, this asexual bucket. I think those people, and you may not care about this, that's fine, but I think it's interesting, fail to notice that it's not like they're just sexual. People aren't the same like that. It creates kind of an illusion that people are like one or the other. And again, I know a lot of people know it's not that way, but I think identifying it this way does further that effect. It makes people think in terms of, you know, I am sexual, so how are people when they are sexual? I'm that way, and I feel weird if I'm not that way. And people do that, you know. If you don't believe me, I talk to people. You'll see that it's hard to notice, but if you listen to them for a long time, you'll catch them kind of expecting something of themselves because there's this like bucket that doesn't actually exist, in my opinion. Nobody magically just is disinterested in that. We just all have different thresholds for how much of that we want. And sex and sexuality and intimacy in general, doesn't have to be sex, are a tool for communication and feeling connected to people as much as they are a sort of instinctual or hormonal need. And how much we want that communication tool, how much we feel comfortable with that communication tool, and our hormones are all completely different based on a variety of natural and artificial environmental factors, based on our nature and our nurture and the people around us. They are utterly unpredictable and not deterministic. They're just another quality of yourself, you know? I feel like from my personal experience, you know, I'm attracted to people not very related to their gender. I have been attracted to people, boys and girls and non-binary people. And I don't use those quotation marks pejoratively. I just mean that's not what I think when I look at them. I just think I'm attracted to that person. But because I don't want to be sexual with men. I just don't desire to be. It doesn't appeal to me. Intimate, sure, but sexual, no. It just doesn't appeal to me. This is not puzzling unless you think of it as being like, I'm sexual or not. Why do I randomly not like that, but I do like this? There really isn't any conflict here. It just kind of was created out of thin air by people trying to rigidly identify. The way I'm going to finish out this topic is a sort of, I think this bothered me for a very long time. You know, in our society's history, we've gone down the path of identifying, you know, creating these labels. They increase visibility. They help with rights for these groups and with them, you know, being recognized as just like everybody else and deserving the exact same treatment. We've gone down that path, and there's a reason we went down it. But there is a big negative, because it treats people as though they inherently are or are limited to, that's the key thing, these things. Now, again, please, if you find that valuable, that's fine. I just think it's interesting to think about how there was a loss there. We do now kind of have to untangle, you know, are we now treating each other as artificially more different than we are? We absolutely are. Don't try to tell me otherwise. There are benefits. I'm not sure what we should do about this, but there is this problem where personality tests and the psychology underlying them, we kind of gave into the temptation to let everybody label themselves, and that made it harder going forward. That giving into that made it harder in the future for people to really know themselves. This means that people that did this have a kind of landmine in their social life or their romantic or sexual or relationship life, because they don't actually have their own internal, true, deep down self as their thing they're identifying as. They kind of just picked a label. And it may not be very different from the label. You know, if you're like basically gay and you say that you're gay, you might be wondering, well, what is the problem? Look, there maybe isn't one. And I'm not here to tell you that the benefits of using the label outweigh the detriments. I don't think they do, and I certainly don't know. My point is simply that in a relationship, if you have had the pleasure of being in a long-term, close relationship, you will know how little a subtle difference in how you feel can make a big difference in the relationship. And misunderstanding yourself or telling other people something about yourself that isn't quite what you mean, but it's just easier to say it that way, can have huge consequences over the long term. It takes a long time, but there is this, it's really not sowing good seeds. That's how I feel. I would implore you, if you enjoy these kinds of things, just to think about that, not to get rid of them. They might be helpful, but really think about them. Think whenever you read one, whenever you take a personality test, focus first on what isn't true about you when you read through it. Look at things and think, be really critical. Think this is like someone's talking to you. Copy paste it into a Word document, write your name on top of it, and read through it and think, well, hold on, what are you saying about me? Or have someone else, have a friend read it to you and tell you you are those things. Have them word it that way. Like it says that you're lawful good, and I say you're a really routine-based person. You're pretty rigid. You're not really interested in deviating from the rules. You feel like the code of conduct is very important, and defending that is worth making compromises for. Accuse the person. Have yourself accused of those things. That should help you notice where you are not that thing. You are absolutely not that thing. The personality test will not help. It will say, once you're done, you are blank. And your first response would be, I most certainly am not. Let's see what you have to say. And then sure, yeah, it can be a lot of fun. But I think taking them with a critical eye is the only way they should be looked at. I find this topic, as many topics, very interesting. As you can tell, I had a lot to say about this one before you asked it. It's really interesting to see how the parlays feel to talk about when I know what I want to say about the topic after reading it, but I wasn't already thinking about it. You know what I mean? Whereas this was the one that this was 100% formed before I even read the topic. So I hope that I adapted it well to what you were interested in. I sure knew what I wanted to say. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I agree that it can be, it can encourage laziness. And that's not good. We should all be on this journey to know ourselves as best as possible together. There's no pejorative for me if you don't perfectly understand yourself. You're welcome here. Just don't claim that you do. If you don't, and you don't. That's my humble request for literally everybody.